So, hi everyone. Welcome to Bridges to the Soul, episode 4. I'm Melanie Erbar.
And I am Tom Eckert. And thank you, Mel, for having me again on your beautiful show.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So today we're going to be talking about something that we think has been coming up not only for us personally, but also in the collective, with just the events and just a lot of the movement that's been happening the last few months or since the beginning of this year, which is a topic related to the light. So it's related to the light and our soul, and how are we connecting to that part of ourselves? How are we connecting to the essence of who we are beyond the world of matter and form, beyond the ideas that we have of our personality, beyond the identifications that we have with our ego. So this is it's a pretty wide topic, and it will be perhaps a little bit more metaphysical sometimes than other episodes we've had, but we're going to try to also bring it back down into this world and this reality, because this is where we all live. And yeah, as part of our podcast, it tries to help and guide others in these questions that have to do with how do we follow a spiritual path, and how do we focus on our spiritual development when we're living in a very rational world that kind of consciously or unconsciously is trying to strip us away or further away from that truth or those truths that we have. So let's get into this a little bit, Tom. So you were mentioning earlier to me that you had been going through quite a bit of transformations yourself this year, that you had been experiencing some changes on the physical level, some changes on the psychological and the spiritual level, and that there were some truths that we're trying to break through, and some like a leveling up, which is ironic. We've talked about leveling up before.
Yeah.
We did. We had an episode on this, but you felt a sense of there's something shifting, something is moving in a higher direction, something is ascending perhaps. So why don't you cue us in a little bit about that, share about that experience, and we can take it from there.
Okay. Let's see where to begin, because a lot has been happening, and this is not new, right? There are like these phases where something pushes through and tries to emerge, like on the level of soul or the level of light that we are. And right, we are both. We are a physical being and a spiritual being, heaven and earth. We are both simultaneously. And so from like a zoom out perspective, there's actually a very beautiful evolution taking place. The light that we are, the side of us that is eternal, that is lasting. The physical side of us is constantly changing. So we change costumes, so to speak, like in a show, right? So we change personalities. Personalities, we wear them temporarily. And like in another incarnation, we might wear a completely different personality. But the side of us that is the light being, the soul, is the same. And so that light constantly tries to push forth into matter and become manifest, visible, so that through this extremely dense form, and we know this density is like a word that like encapsulates many, many feelings. And I apologize for all this flickerings on my screen. I don't know why this happens. Just for the viewers, it's some technical glitch on my side. I don't know.
All right. I thought there was something wrong with my computer, actually.
No. It's actually on my side, and I don't know what caused it. So my apologies to you. So there is almost like this natural impulse at the very foundation of existence as light, as this primordial, remembrance of oneness, of spiritual existence that wants to kind of emerge through matter, through material form, and inform it. It's beautiful. to inform it with remembrance. Like, wow, matter is spirit. Matter is light. So I'm not a scientist, and what I'm going to say now is maybe like really, 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 really upside down and like that not scientifically correct in any way, but from the little that I know, science already knows that matter is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so now energy in the way that science sees it is not the energy that we're going to talk about here. And we're going to talk about like a deeper dimension than energy, which is the dimension of light that precedes energy, the dimension of essence. And that, so it's literally like essence wants to show matter and remind matter, you are essence. So that suddenly, instead of experiencing all the extremely dense experiences that we feel here as material beings, like, jealousy and enmity and hatred and competition and right survival of the fittest, and putting a lot of emphasis like on the wrong things, literally, there is like a deeper dimension, and it has infinite amount of time. This is why there's no hurrying in this process. It can take billions of years. Doesn't, universe has time. So it's like this slowly emerging process of soul, light, the light being that we are, that spark, trying to push its way through matter and density and remind it, wow, oh wow, I remember, I am light. I am light, I am love, I am wisdom. I am in oneness with whatever it is I encounter. And so to tie it back with what you asked me, there are these phases in our lives, especially if we are awakening souls, awakening people. There's a process that's initiated, a process where the soul starts to push through more intensely through matter. And this process comes in ebbs and flows. So, and we don't know exactly, when is going to be an ebb and when is going to be a flow. And during these times, there can be a lot of expansion of consciousness. There can be a lot of purging of emotional trauma and blockages on the way. There can be disorientation, confusion, empowerment, clarity, insight, and all of those in any kind of arrangement and blend. Right? So there's no, right? It's not necessarily like, it's not as
so wonderfully rational, isn't it?
Exactly.
So easy to track.
Exactly. And we want, don't we? We want things, like we're conditioned to want things to be super clear, rationally.
Yeah, and
linear.
Linear, ideally, in a way where we can pinpoint what's coming next, where we can plan our lives according to what's coming next, and that's just not. That's not the reality of, is it? Yeah, there's no control over it, is it?
Exactly. There's very, very little control, and so we find ourselves in this kind of like very, how should I say? It's like we are very much conditioned as a society to lean on the intellect. Like the intellect became the supreme, I don't know what, like the supreme go-to kind of wise one to draw information on, and or knowledge from, and as a matter of fact, the intellect is just one faculty of our being. But the problem with giving the intellect so much power is that we have a certain imbalance, and that imbalance is called cynicism, sarcasm, So we've become cynical about anything that has to do with the emotional realm, the intuitive realm, everything that actually positions us in a vulnerable place. Intellect is not vulnerable.
No, it's interesting. I was just remembering a video that I saw from Sadhguru, and Sadhguru was talking about this, about the intellect and how the Western world especially overvalues the um, the intellect's abilities. So he says something along the lines of the intellect, you have to see it as like a knife with a very sharp blade. And of course, a knife with a very sharp blade is a great tool to have in your toolkit. It's a great weapon to have for the world to defend yourself against, you know, animals or predators or whatever you want. But he was saying, he would say, if you were to try to use a knife, however, to sew your clothes, that would not be very efficient, would it? You would just end up dabbing a bunch of holes inside your clothes instead of actually fixing them. And so this is where this abstraction comes from, of realizing, oh, the intellect is just a tool, one of many tools.
Exactly.
What are these other tools that we have that, for the most part, we're not really being taught to nurture, and we're not really being taught to listen to, for those of us who are naturally already quite strong in the emotional realm or in the intuitive realm, for example. So there's more of this, I think there's this general conditioning that pulls us towards this idea of I have an intuitive feeling, I have a gut feeling, I have this sensation or this feeling that it needs to go in this direction, that I need to do this with my life, and the general response being, I think we can agree here, the general response being, oh, well, but what's that based on? Do you have a list? Is there some kind of rational explanation? Is there some kind of dissection of all the elements involved in this and why that's your rational decision? And if you just say, no, it's just an intuitive feeling, I think it's mostly encountered with a bit of like a smile and a frown at the same time, just like
sometimes some form of disdain, and also to be honest, like we always measure these intuitive calls according to whether it's going to be whether this decision or step we're calling is utilitarian in some form or another. So we measure everything, according to
in terms of the outcome.
Utility. Exactly. Yeah, like, is it going to be like, okay, is it going to give you more money? Is it going to advance your career? Is it going to, you know what I mean? We measure things in a very twisted way.
Yeah, and not to get too off topic, but also something that I've noticed is that the intuitive callings that we have, when we really are turning off the logic, there's a misconception that has to do with the fact that your intuition is always going to take you down to the rainbow land, to like the promised land. That's not at all true. Just because something is an intuitive feeling and you're being led by your intuition into a decision, or to engaging with a person, going to a certain place, whatever it is, it's not necessarily always because what you are meant to find there is the next big moment. It's the next big moment of flow where all of a sudden your enlightenment is stronger and you're growing more and you're experiencing more of the fullness of who you are. Yes, you might be experiencing the fullness of who you are through that experience, but excuse my redundancy, but sometimes your intuition is also going to take you down roads that you're just supposed to transition because you're maybe really far away from connecting with who you are. And because through a certain suffering, through a certain pain, through a certain reality check, if you want to call it that way, you're going to come closer to that person, to that essence again. So it's reminding me of this thing of like the essence is always trying to push through. That light is always trying to push through. It's just, do we recognize it when it's happening? Or how do we recognize when it's happening, especially if we're resisting it, especially if our rational mind, especially if we're very rational oriented and the community around us is very logical minded. How do we recognize when this is happening, Tom? And how do we create space for it? How do we, just not resist it so much and not push it away? Because I think that's a pretty common tendency in the awakening process itself, right? Like the awakening and then resisting it.
The first thing that comes to mind, when you ask this question is like this overarching title: loss of control. And I want to kind of like set it here as a just as a reference point. If we truly want to merge with the truth of our being, with the wonder of our being, with that light, it's inevitable that we accept loss of control and an allowance of a deeper dimension that is not necessarily known in our conscious mind to take the reins in its own hands. Now, this intelligence that I'm referring to is already at work in our lives each and every moment. It's the energy that moves our blood. We do not control that in any way. It's the energy that generates our breath in and out. It's the energy that allows us to even open our mouth and speak right now. Like, how on earth do we do that? We just will it. We don't even know what will is. We just will it and it happens because something is enabling it. The Earth is orbiting in a certain trajectory in such a harmonious, trustworthy way. It's governed by such incredible intelligence, such incredible and sensitive love. This is not in any way in our hands or under our control. So in this spiritual process, I think that first and foremost, we need to kind of acknowledge that most of our life is actually not in our hands. Many, many things that happen to us, even if you just like for a second, like step out of the whole concept of the spiritual path and light, anything that happens to us in life, it's like John Lennon said, I think something along the lines of like, life is what happens when we are having other plans or something like that. Right. And it's like, it's really true because we think life is going to be like this or like that. We have pictures and images, but life happens in its own way. So it's not really in our control. It's just like when we were thinking about it, we think we're controlling it, but it's not true. Our lives end up being whatever they end up being. Like, I don't really know people who knew how their lives are going to come out and it actually came out that way exactly. It's just... And so within the spiritual path, like there's that subtler process that starts to, take place. And I think that we start to feel that. You ask, like, how do we recognize it and so on? It's like, I'm saying, like, we feel, first of all, that something about the way we live, we individually and we as a collective, is really, really, really off center. Where is it going? What are we doing here? We start to ask profound questions that come right from the heart and gut of our being, from the deepest places. We suddenly wake up, we open our eyes and we say, this is not obvious that I'm existing here as a conscious being. I am in life. What on earth is this miracle? to just open up and snap out of that dream of constantly busying myself with the objects of life, cell phones and computers and social media and the little fights that I have at home and and the clubs that I want to and my cigarettes and my sexual experiences and the travels and the many things I feel I need to experience. It's like it's a little bit like, babies are very often, their attention span is very short, and it's very much captured by any kind of like sensory stimuli that you just present before them. And we're like that also as adults. Our stimuli are maybe a bit more sophisticated, but it's the same. Now it's a cell phone, and for a baby, it's like a little rattling toy, whatever, right? And so the baby's like, ah, and immediately they forget what was there before and just turn around like, ah, and then something else rattles in the other direction. Oh, and we're the same.
Yeah.
We're completely distracted by things that have no significance. And the waking up that starts to happen for the awakening being, the awakening soul, is like something deep within realizes, you know what? This cannot be random. Something else is happening here. It cannot be that life is just about distracting myself with like random occurrences, random phenomena, and objects of life. But what is it all about? Like, what's happening here? Life is so fleeting, right? As I always say, like if we're lucky, we make it to the age of 80, 90. If we don't die much, much earlier, which happens very often. So we don't know. We're here for like a very, very short time. What are we doing here? That's like the first waking up. If we're lucky, this waking up, if we're not too afraid of it, and if there's sufficient honesty in our hearts, we let it inform us. We let it guide us. And this is not an intellectual process. This waking up, this questioning might appear as an intellectual questioning, but the motivating force that actually brought it into being is much deeper than the intellect. It originates in our soul, from the realm of light.
I think this is very interesting because it's made me think. Well, it's made me remember, actually, more than think, of many, many children that I've had the pleasure of spending time with and taking care of, and just also remembering back to my own childhood and most of the children that I've encountered in my life. It's peculiar that most kids, even in the most dire of circumstances, somewhere before the age of 6, I would say. This is not by any means, I don't have any kind of quantitative study to back up what I'm about to say, mind you, but it's just based on my observation. Is I think almost every child that I've encountered before the age of 6 has certainly experienced this exact moment of awakening that you're describing, which is this question of, oh, what is this all about? Yeah. It's oftentimes like after the age of 4 when the questions of why come up. Why is the sky blue? Why are the trees like this? And why is the sun shining? And why are people reacting like this? Why are they not like that? Why are we here? Where do babies come from? And like this is where all these existential questions come up, because it's also the formative part of the child's brain is still also in the, I think the brain waves are also still in the theta level. So there's different kinds of information that are coming through to children than they do after the age of 7, which is when the intellect starts developing a lot stronger, and also the child's sense of identity becomes much stronger. So it's just peculiar to me that as adults, if we are engaging at all with the notion of awakening, if we're engaging at all with a notion of spirituality, or just a wanting to understand life as a whole, that we would circle back around to these existential questions that we all had when we were children, because I think even if children get so distracted, they have the capacity to marvel. I think somebody, I remember also in college reading that and studying that the ability to philosophize about life requires the criteria of marveling. Being able to marvel and wonder at life and of the mystery of life and the elements that are unknown to us is what allows us to even begin to ask questions and to ask open-ended questions as well, because philosophy oftentimes gives you open-ended answers. There are, and you are using your intellect, but there's also this element of recognizing what is beyond the grip of the mind, what cannot be grasped, what is on the metaphysical level that we cannot access through the intellect. So obviously this is where meditation comes in as a tool to help quiet the intellect and to help open us up. But what are other things that maybe someone who has the intention of connecting or like connecting again to their essence, and maybe even for the first time really discovering what is that essence? What does it feel like to go through life without being constantly distracted, but they're still in that state where there's just so many distractions, there's so much going on. How can that person begin to approach this process? Like, how can they get closer? What can they do to help them turn off their mind and soften a little bit these cravings that I think ultimately they're the cravings for distraction? How can they approach this in a way that will maybe not be so radical that it'll automatically create resistance, which I think is quite common when we try to do something that's very radical. We're going to resist it even more because it's too radical from what we know. So what are maybe some transitional things that somebody can do, or something that's gentle that can open up that space?
So I think that, part of the wisdom of mastering our energy, whether it's with spirituality, the spiritual urge that you're just talking about, this emerging urge, or mastering our schedule, is knowing how to create space. So for example, if I'm a very busy woman or man, I need to learn how to create spaces. For example, if I want to be focused in my job, in my work, I need to know how to disconnect from my cell phone, for example. I create the space for something. In this 1 hour, I'm focused on my job. I eliminate all distractions from my space. I don't let anybody talk to me. I allocate this 1 hour only to one thing. I set aside social media. I set aside distractions. And that's like the art, in a sense, of mastering our energy in space. And if we take that same principle and apply it to that urge, we need to create a space dedicated to that, where things do not disturb us, such as, distractions, overly exciting desires, people that do not understand or even resist that wish of ours. Bring in to that space sources such as books, videos. Today we're privileged with, a lot of immediately accessible information, and also connect with actual teachers, people that are already deeply rooted in that wisdom. So, for example, I can set myself an hour a week. Okay, again, I'm giving one example. An hour a week where I am sitting quietly, And this is my time of nourishing and cultivating the connection with this emerging light, this emerging wisdom that wants to be known and discovered and seen and felt. And in that space, each one, has the freedom to arrange it in the way that really speaks to their own heart. Maybe put some calming music. Maybe you want to be completely in stillness. Set your, cell phone aside. Take a good book about spirituality, something that is, nice and deep, and sit and read with actual paper, so that you can also connect. And I'm saying with actual, paper, like an actual book, right? Like a printed book, because it has the quality of life
Touch.
Energy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
touch.
In life energy, there's something about screens that has this digital energy. It creates a certain disturbance.
It's detached.
It's detached.
It's a bit more detached. Like
it's not rooted in what we can call the chi, the energy of life, of being. And it's good actually to sometimes be without like devices, so that we can actually feel, as our sensitivity grows, we can start to also feel in the quietude while we read a book that there is some kind of ambience. That ambience is not something random. So as we allow that space to exist, we want to heighten the dimension of sensitivity. And that sensitivity is listening to the tiniest of oscillations, the tiniest of vibrations, of frequencies, of sensations and feelings that arise within our being. And we start to realize, wow, I'm reading this book now. And as I'm reading this paragraph, suddenly there's a feeling, a certain deep form of excitement and joy, or a sense that reminds me of early childhood, for example. What is that? Wow, where did it come from? It's not belonging to the past, even if it reminds me my childhood. The feeling is happening now. What is that feeling? Wow, where does it emerge from? And I'm just attentive. There's nobody in the room to distract me. I don't have immediate devices to distract me with and to immediately, answer a message. I'm just sitting with it, listening, developing my subtle inner senses, the senses that actually allow me to contact my being on a deeper dimension. Wow, new energies, new sensations. What are they? And I start to develop this connection with my being. Right? So I'm going to, take the mic in a second, but I just want to say, just to kind of come full circle here, we want to create spaces, and it can start small and it can expand based on our capacity to contain it. And my advice is to always build step by step, drop by drop by drop, instead of, lighting like an enormous fire, getting super excited, like doing some kind of extreme activity, like 1 week Vipassana retreat in total silence, being excited about it, having like a peak experience, and never again sitting on a meditation cushion, never again reading a book, because it was just like a rebound effect to an overexcited step that was like going ahead of oneself. Better actually build it in a solid way so that it stays. We want to cultivate a solid flame for the long run.
I like this. I like this a lot, what you said, because I think I've experienced both sides of that coin. Mind you, my journey has not been that long. It's been, maybe 3 years now. And I experienced both sides of that coin, where I remember actually, I think it might have been, I think it was with you. There was one of the sanghas that we had. One of the satsangs that we had, where we talked about this thing of chasing spiritual experiences versus actual spiritual growth. And the fact that that you might have in the very beginning of your awakening, some people experience these kind of wild meditation moments, these really wild, like astral travel, I'm not sure where I am, what's happening, like scenarios, and they're often some other universe, and they can be in there for hours, and um, they experience almost like a type of dissociation in that state where they really dissociate from their body and from everything that's happening here. And then their meditation, or the meditation practice then, or the spiritual practices, multiple, they become about chasing that experience, or that kind of mind-blowing, mind-altering, eureka, whatever you want to call them, moments, right? That are just kind of big and
Peak
loud.
moments.
Yes, they're big and they're loud and they're impactful, and they shake things up and they make you question everything that you know, and etc. But that's not the reality of the spiritual practice, and it's also, from my experience, not where you want to be at regularly, because it is actually extremely dissociative to be constantly in a state of peak experiences, because you have no landing ground if you're all the time in the top, which is, I think, an episode that we could do separately entirely, which I think would be great, is an episode on the chakras, and like how important it is to work with the lower three up to the heart, and not just the upper three, because a lot of people, when they're beginning a spiritual journey, it's all about the top three. So the top three being the throat, the third eye, and the crown, and those being the places that they're opening the most, which can give a lot of these visual journeys and things like this, right? But what I wanted to focus on here, or what I wanted to get back to here, is the smallness of light, and how it exists, and our essence, and how it exists, and how we can connect to it in these small ways. And it's really important, because I think we live in a world that, as you said, really incentivates being in peak experiences and being in these kind of ultra states, in these like life hacked states all the time, as in that's the ultimate way to live, or like that's how you're going to be an uber human who has uber accomplishments and uber states of flow, and everything in this kind of magnified way. Like it has to all be greater than life. And even if we inspect the phrase greater than life, what does that actually mean? What do you mean you want to be greater than life? Like you want to be what exactly? How could you ever possibly be greater than life? You are life. Everything is life. So how can you be greater than everything that is? It's not an achievable thing. That's a ego delusion. It's a delusion of grandeur. It's a delusion of wanting to be more than what you are. And perhaps your essence is really just simple. Perhaps your essence is not to be a guru, or it's not to be, I don't know, like Elon Musk or something. I don't, like maybe your essence, your soul essence, is not to be some kind of incredibly accomplished, magnificently recognized person. Maybe your essence is just to be someone who works in a tea shop and has a couple kids and a cat, and has a really gentle, fulfilled life. And it's as simple as that, but to come in contact with that requires something smaller than these peak experiences, and valuing that correctly.
Yes, and I think, if I may jump in here and
Please.
say, I think, the reason that we need peak experiences, and this becomes increasingly more so, you can see it like in trailers from movies today. My wife and I, we're always baffled that trailers today tell you nothing anymore about the movie. They're just like, flickering moments of extreme stimulation and sound, and you don't have a clue what the movie is about. So it's all about creating intense stimulation, intense peak moment to peak moment to peak moment, like pictures of peak moments. Boom, that's the trailer.
Go to the movies and watch it.
Exactly.
But I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter. Go watch it.
Coming out in the cinema December 21st. Kind of like, it's like, but what's the movie about?
The
like,
best it doesn't matter. It's the best movie you've ever seen.
Exactly, right? So it's and part of the need for increasingly stimulating peak experiences is because we are increasingly desensitized.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to that spacious, silent room that we're creating for ourselves, and this emphasis on sensitivity, when we can look at this awakening process, like from the perspective of childhood to adolescence to adulthood to old age. When we're very young, we need a lot of stimulation. We need a lot of fireworks, excitement, colors. If something, it's very hard for us to perceive subtlety. It's very hard. This is why children, for example, are very mean to one another, or teenagers can be very insensitive to their surroundings. They haven't developed yet those faculties. And so when we're adults, for example, we can appreciate subtler things like art and poetry and subtle interactions that usually, by and large, kids and teenagers do not appreciate in that same way. It's a different phase of evolution. Same goes on the spiritual path. So we need peak experiences in the beginning, and it makes a lot of sense because this is what kind of lures us into the path and shows us, wow, there's magnificence here. Because if someone would come and tell us, yeah, it ends up in a certain harmony and balance and a kind of stillness and wisdom, it would be like,
and you just sit and read your book and everything is great.
No, this is boring. I don't want that. It's like, because we are not yet in a place where we can appreciate the preciousness of such a state, where the teeny tiniest of things can be extremely touching to the heart and being. But we have to have a certain maturity and refinement, and that maturity and refinement comes with time, practice, and cultivation over years, and maturation. This is not something we can simply conjure up.
And allowance, I think, like a permittance of that subtlety to develop. I just kind of want to chime in here because I was instantly thrown back just now to a phase that I was going through last year. I think it was around summer, like late summer, I think like August, September, around that time. It was a phase I was going through where this subtlety, the subtlety that you're talking about, after being in a bit of like a working cocoon for the first 6-7 months of the year, that was very mind-driven, accomplishment-driven energy. Like it was all work, connections, bam, 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 go, 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 go. It was consistently like this for the first 7 months after the 2020 COVID period. It was like a reactivation of that part. And it was followed by extreme exhaustion, like a bit of like meltdown, burnout situation, like not too extreme, but it was definitely coming on. And I decided to consciously take a month or two to just stop everything I was doing, because I was really overwhelmed by this constant action taking and this moving forward, but feeling like in that process of being so busy, there was no time to recognize, what am I actually feeling? All the subtleties, all the layers, all of the things that had come up. And what I'm getting at here is that what I noticed is that when I did take that time, and you would just go for a walk in the park, and there was literally nothing special. There was nothing special going on in that park right across my house, where I've gone 200 times, probably more, probably like 350 times. I know the park well. There's nothing special about it per se. And yet in that silence, it only happened after a week or two. of not being so distracted anymore. The subtleties of how birds were moving, how squirrels were interacting, like how the trees, like the colors of the trees, the subtlety of the bark, like there was just so many small, tiny little things that all of a sudden were so much more alive than they had been before. And because of that, and because you were starting to realize how much you had not been aware, you had been so in the mind that you had not been connected to how you're also part of that, how your breath is part of that, how everything that you are is part of that. I was literally, because I was so, I had been so in my mind, that subtlety layer started popping up and I was moved to tears constantly. I would be crying looking at like a flower. Like it was that ridiculous, like ridiculous in the sense that like then trying to communicate that that's your state, that's the phase you arrived in. Trying to communicate that to other people was, it was challenging. I didn't manage to communicate it to some people because also like we don't live in a world that allows that subtlety to be. It doesn't allow for us to just sit for an hour and marvel at branches that are moving in the wind. That's not productive. What do you mean you want to go take a few days off and just do nothing and maybe just read a book? That's not allowed.
No.
And we internalize this. Even if we don't want to, we internalize it because it's really deeply ingrained in us and it's also ancestral. And we, you know, our parents, our grandparents, a lot of them, they were not allowed to do this either because their life circumstances didn't allow for it. And there was a survival situation that was much more intense on some level than it is today, at least in certain countries, like in the certain industrialized countries that we live in, you know, like we're maybe no longer in the war situations that we were in before. Maybe the markets and everything has to do with like the industrial revolution is fast. So we're not going to get into the details of it, but I think that we can all understand that there was less allowance for it before, and today everything goes so fast that taking time to be in silence and to allow for the subtleties of life to emerge is an act of rebellion.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I always say, I know it might sound a little bit, it might come out or understood as an arrogant statement. It's definitely not. It's simply an observation. I think a very honest and truthful one. That is, you know, which is the vast majority of humanity is not very intelligent and not very sensitive.
No.
The great vast majority. And I'm talking about, again, if you just imagine it as like a pyramid, then at the very bottom, which constitutes like the biggest percentage of people, right? It's like, it's the least intelligent, the least sensitive, the least open people. And at the top, as you go up the pyramid, you have people that are slightly more conscious, slightly more sensitive until you reach the peak, which is like the teeny tiniest percentage of people, 0.00001, that is actually aware of deeper truth, subtlety, and multi-layeredness of one's existence and being, and is in touch with things that they are actually they actually, how should I say, represent like the hallmark of truth, and they are the ones that actually can reflect back to you something honest and truthful, and they have the capacity for sensitivity to not be cynical about, you know, or dismissive about dimensions of being that are not strictly limited to intellect. And because people often say, come on, you're talking to me about intuition. This is not grounded. This is like woo-woo stuff, airy, fairy, fancy. And I'm saying, no, a wise person, a sensitive person knows that anything that exists is grounded. Anything that is reality. You cannot say, oh, come on, man, be realistic. Well, I am realistic. It's just that in your realistic, because you're in a different stage of the pyramid where you don't have enough sensitivity, you are cutting off pieces of reality and say, no, that's not reality. Reality is only practical, I don't know, like career. It's like you limit what real means. But real is everything that exists. We just need to learn to open up to it and respect it and see how it all works in harmony and how everything has its place in space. Right? So the vast majority are never gonna, I think that like trying to express and explain those extremely subtle and rare findings of our own being is to the vast majority is a waste of time and energy and unnecessary.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you. And I say unfortunately because I think I've rarely met someone who didn't experience some kind of pain attached to this acknowledgement of reality. It's painful because you want to be able to share that subtlety because it's beautiful. You know, there's something so beautiful about being moved emotionally by the subtlety of life, by these metaphysical aspects that a lot of people feel just so like it's just you cannot you will not be able to reach them on any level of understanding. They will not be able to connect with you with what you're saying. And it's such a shame because it is something that is really touching. It's really moving. This sense of light, the sense of connectivity, the sense of our essence, these deeper things, they can really also shift extremely the course of our actions and of our life choices and of our path. And I think it's painful to not be able to share this or not be able to communicate it effectively with people that you love, maybe, you know, people that you really care about, that you kind of really wish could go on that journey for themselves, or they could kind of understand that that's where you're at. But unfortunately, I have to say that I think that you're right. And I think that most people, it is wasted energy and it's wasted time trying to explain to them. You can try, but if you come up against a reaction that is just not receptive of what you're saying, it's best to, I think, let that go and understand that not everybody's going to be on that frequency, and perhaps seeking out, right? I think that this is something you've mentioned plenty of times before, seeking out a sangha, a group of people following a similar path, or people that have a connection to spirit, or perhaps a teacher that will be able to reflect these emotions back at you and will be able to engage with you from a place of the heart and not the mind, you know, without that cynicism, someone who will inspire that balance. Because I think ultimately it's all about this, right? It's about trying to find the balance. Like, how do you balance out what inevitably exists, which is the rational? And how do you balance it out with something that is more of the heart, that just operates on through a very different language altogether?
And now I'm going to chime in also and say, you know, and what you're just saying is even more important in earlier stages, in the beginning stages of the journey, because
yes,
in later stages, when you're already established in your being, there's sufficient confidence and immovability. So people cannot move you anymore. Nothing can move you anymore from the truth.
You already know what you know. You know what you know. Yeah.
Yes, and it becomes immovable. It's not something that can be swayed or changed or messed with. But in earlier stages, it's like cultivating a very fragile seed. You know, like a very very tender, you know, seed. that is just starting to sprout. Like the wind, the rain can kill it very, very quickly. Too much light. So exposure, right, to different intense forces, like it has to be attended very, very carefully, cautiously, with love. And so there is, especially in earlier stages, it's important not to involve too many people, just as you said so beautifully, find kindred spirits on the path, people who are sensitive and share that sensitivity and share that passion and that willingness to be in a non-cynical environment towards those different dimensions of being. Don't waste your time in trying to convince the ones who are already convinced, like in the other way, right? The ones who haven't reached that place in their evolution or their soul journey where they can contain deeper sensitivities and subtleties, because it can really shake your boat. It can really make you doubt yourself, and you don't want that in earlier stages. You want to be very solid, and it's a little bit like when you join any kind of like, say you want to study martial arts. If you would constantly try to spar with black belts and you're like a white belt, you're going to be super, super discouraged very early on and quit.
Yeah.
In our world, it's the opposite way around. Like the black belts are actually people who haven't even, in that metaphor, there are people who haven't even stepped into, the journey or the willingness to be in subtlety. And you're constantly battling with people who are gonna really confuse that emerging sprout of wisdom and light. And you need to, in order to maintain the trust, the confidence in what's revealed to you, you need a surrounding that supports you. That's very, very important. As you progress, as you become more settled and established in your knowing and in your actual experience, then nobody can sway you anymore. Nobody can move you anymore. And I'm really speaking from experience. I've tried, like, it's a very impersonal process that we all go through. We are revealed a new reality. We kind of like we start to see and experience new things, and immediately we want to tell everyone. And we want to also be the ones who see versus the ones who don't see. So there's also like an egoic game going on our part. So we want to tell everyone, to show them how much we see, and they're just like these ignorant, earthlings who are still not evolved enough to see the actual truth. And it's important, to grow out of that as well, like to just be humble, do your stuff and shut up. You know what I mean? Like, and shutting up will serve you and others, because when you shut up, you also don't involve other forces that are going to then step in, intrude, and pry into your stuff and disturb your very, very important cultivation. So it goes both ways, and you're going to also not impose your egoic, like, trip on others. So just like stick to what you're doing, stick to your practice. Don't like involve people that shouldn't be involved. Involve those who should be involved.
Yeah.
Cultivate yourself. And by doing so, you're actually building a very solid vessel that can hold that insight and light and eventually become super solid and immovable in that regard. And
to remember that it's I love this as like a rounding up. It's like just shut up, seek out some silence, and read your books. Like, in the sense of, it doesn't have to be reading a book if that's not your thing. If it's making music, it's that. But like, it's this detached from the ego, detached from the need to tell other people why they're not seeing it right, and how they're so insensitive, and how the world is never going to be better this way, and we're not going to elevate to collective consciousness if they don't all join. They're not going to join. It doesn't matter. You're going to waste your time completely, and you're going to be swayed by, or you're going to have to fight against the voices of the rationale, which are in our world stronger. They just are. They're more present. They're stronger because there's more of them. And that's just it. It's not because there's more truth to them. It's just because there's more in quantity, and it is the norm that you're going to be dealing with. So it's just like let that go, sit, read, be in silence with yourself, or, go for a walk, take time for yourself, stop being so busy, stop distracting yourself. Just practice something small and simple. Maybe it's knitting. Whatever, gardening, like whatever, it will give you that connection, right? But it's like, it's focusing on the subtle things instead of, and finding a couple other people who are doing the same. And maybe really in that simplicity, finding out more and more and more who you are, who you really are underneath this incarnation.
Yes. And I think that, maybe we can kind of slowly wrap it up and end on that discovering who we are in this incarnation. I mean, this brings us kind of right back to the source, to the questioning that we talked about in the beginning. Like, what are we doing here? What are we? What's happening here actually? And if we're sensitive enough, we're gonna start to sense that what we are is not just a physical being. If we're silent enough, if we give it space, if we develop that sensitivity, we let it be, we will at some point realize that we are soul, we are light. Light is not even energy, it's prior to energy. We are in essence. There's an eternal essence that we are, and it's constantly here, it's constantly present. And as a matter of fact, it is what animates and speaks its own love and intelligence through the body right now, and animates the personality of the body. And it has essential qualities. It's like a true divine spark, a light, an emanation of the divine, a unique emanation that has a certain essence to it. And we can start to feel that, like, who am I before being a physical form? Right? Like, who am I right now before I am a physical form? This is not a question of time. It's phrased like that, so the intellect can understand it as if we're talking about time. But when I say before, I mean before on the experiential level. Like, if your experience is made like a Russian doll, a doll within a doll within a doll within a doll, it's like this layer is like the physical body. But if we're sensitive enough, if we go before, but before not in the sense of time, in the sense of experience, we say, oh, wow, I'm also an energy body. And if we go even before in the sense of experience right now, we say like, oh, wow, I am a soul. There's also beyond that, but like on a very intimate, individual level of what am I? There's something very sacred about the discovery of I am soul, I am light, I am a spiritual being expressing itself through a human body. In many ways, the body is just empty. It's empty of a self. There is no a self anywhere to be found in the body, but there is light, an intelligence, an eternal intelligence with a specific fragrance that is what you are. We can eliminate the word who. Who is a little bit deceptive. What you are, and that tries to progressively embody itself, literally inform matter with its eternal presence, so that matter itself, and this is felt on the cellular level, as you deepen in meditation, you feel it like you're becoming transparent. This is something that happens to matter itself.
Yeah.
So the soul informs, that light tries to actually penetrate matter, penetrate form, and inform it with remembrance. Oh, yes, everything is spirit. Everything is a spiritual dimension. There is just oneness. There's one reality. And it's a marvel to be a limitless being and to be able to express that through a limited vessel, because in some way you get to experience the tremendous beauty of the unlimited when it's reflected and bounces back to you through a limited form. And so we're constantly trying to move into matter. It's an arduous process. It's a lengthy process. It's a hefty task. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So to remember what's actually happening here, This is the real story, you know what I mean, of humanity. This is the real cosmic drama, as my spiritual teacher used to say. This
I
is the
love
real
that.
cosmic drama. It's not the little drama of our life.
No.
That's the real cosmic drama, the real story that's happening. You know what I mean?
It's just reminded me of something my mom used to say to me. She always be like, "You're always wondering if the existence of the crab." And I was like, well, it's like it's a metaphor of like the existence of the crab is like, why are you're always wondering about the cosmic drama, about this, like, why are we here? What is this? What is this life about? What is everything? And you know, she'd be like, oh, just go to work. You know, like,
yes, we're afraid of that.
Which fair enough, if you dwell on that for too long, it can become existential angst. This is true. It can very easily, if you have no anchor, if your roots are not strong, then your tree trunk is going to go all over the place. And yes, you will feel a lot of existential angst, which was true for me at the time as well. But it's funny because it's the cosmic drama, and it's always there. It's always present. It's just how often do we turn on that channel and watch?
Yes.
You know, and indulge with and engage with it, and realize that we're part of it. We're part of that cosmic drama.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. I think it's a great way to wrap up this episode.
Wrap it up,
and to remind also all the viewers in the audience out there, and as well as ourselves, that in order to even witness the cosmic drama and even begin to feel the subtle layers of our own existence and how we are light and how our essence is existing and our soul is, and this, where is the soul and how do we access it? Where's the access point? I think that we can all agree that silence is kind of silence or some kind of sound that will put you in a state of flow.
Silence is one of the best.
It's one of, I would stick more to silence, because everything else is like you have to choose and find and try and maybe, you know, this is going to remind me of this. Everything else will remind you of something, but silence does not remind you of anything. Silence is just silence. It's unidentified.
Silence is pure, and is a space of listening, and is a space of allowance, and is a space of acceptance, and is a space of, you know, serenity and vulnerable receptivity, where whatever wants to be seen can be seen. And we just need to find our way to cultivate silence. There are many ways to cultivate silence, but we want to cultivate silence, because in silence, many things grow. It's a bit like silence is like the soil for everything else to grow upon. All the insights and all the subtleties and recognitions, but we need that ground, right? It's like the roots. This is part of the roots.
Yeah, they can't grow without the silence, because you just won't be able to access it. The more distractions there are, the further away you'll find yourself from understanding what you are.
Exactly.
Because you'll be too focused on the who.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, wonderful.
Beautiful.
Tom, thank you so much for sharing all of that today. And
thank you. It's a great pleasure.
To the audience also, thank you for tuning in. I'm really curious to hear how this episode landed for you, and what has been your experience with seeking out silence for yourself? What has been your experience with these moments of witnessing, perhaps glimpses of your soul, or glimpses of this light? What has been generally your experience on this path, and what is it that you struggle with the most? I would love to know, just so we can also take this up in other episodes. So yeah, feel free to share with us. You'll find us on YouTube and Spotify for past episodes as well, on mental health and other issues. Anything else to say, Tom, to wrap things up?
I think I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm looking forward to our next episode. It's always really fascinating and free-flowing, and I enjoy it a lot. And I hope that this is leaves our viewers, leaves you guys with food for thought
Mm.
and reflection and meditation. Because eventually it's not just about philosophizing here and talking about like interesting topics. It's these talks are here to perhaps spark an actual movement towards something more real and authentic. So hopefully this is going to be yet another one of those, you know, inspiring moments that move something within you. And thank you, Mel, for initiating this and making this happen.
Thank you, Tom, for participating and giving me the space and the kind of motivation also to do it. And absolutely, I can only agree with you. My only hope always for our chats is that it'll open up the space for new dialogues, and for also those dialogues then turn into some kind of new habit or new type of action and new reality. So here to the next episode, I guess. And
Yes.
yeah, take care, everybody, and
Take care.
we will hear you soon. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.